We wake to dark days in Europe. Days like these are always darkest before dawn. Each breath in is exhaled with brightening clarity. This moment of awareness, this moment of reflection, we Europeans are prepared. We stand by Ukraine. Their fight is our fight. ECFR fellows have mapped the 7 battlegrounds, charting routes through new currencies of power and the weaponization of interdependencies. Europeans now equipped and willing to navigate these dynamics. Previously defending ourselves, now helping our allies defend themselves. We are united. We have a purpose. We have a plan. Change is coming. We are ready. This is the birth of geopolitical Europe.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be here with all of you. My name is José Ignacio Torreblanca. I'm a Senior Policy Fellow and Head of the European Council's of Foreign Relations Office in Madrid. I want to welcome everyone here in the audience, everyone which is watching us as live, and also in various streaming channels in our website, and also EAS, and also social media. Welcome, of course, to our speakers today. High Representative and Vice President Josep Borrell, my dear friend, thank you for being here today. We really appreciate you being here with us. Leonard, our Executive Director at ECFR. We have as well Susi Dennison stepping for Sylvie Kaufman, who tested positive yesterday. And I think she's watching us, so hello, Sylvie. Stay well and get well, recover soon. We have also Jana Puglierin, our head of ECFR office and senior policy fellow in Berlin, and Marietje Schaake, who is the international policy director at the Cyber Policy Institute in Stanford. So we also want to thank our hosts and the teams at ECFR and EAS who make this possible, to Mercator also for helping us with this publication. And we look very much forward also to engagement and interaction. There is a hashtag geopolitical EU. We will be monitoring the conversation and picking up on ideas and comments from there and hopefully bring them back to the audience. So, dear HRVP, dear Mr. Borrell, I remember that once you said that Europe was all about young generations of Europeans, instead of going to war, going on Erasmus. And unfortunately...
That's much better, huh?
And unfortunately, as we speak, people are being killed, cities are being destroyed, and war is back to the continent. So we seems that we were going to navigate uncharted territory, but you know, throughout the last year, we conducted this massive exercise in mapping out the terrains of interdependence and the terrains of power. So we have the impression that there is a lot of uncertainty, but not necessarily uncharted territory. The things that we mapped are still valid, and we claim that this is a very valid intellectual, at least, map. We just need to know how to get from A to B. But this is the exercise we want to start with. So before we start, Mark, why don't you set us the scene in just 5 minutes about this claim that we have charted the territory for Europe's birth of geopolitical Europe. Sorry.
Thank you very much, Nacho. Thank you very much, HRVP, for joining us. It's a great honor to be here with you today. I'm going to talk for a few minutes about the Power Atlas, which we started work on before the war in Ukraine, but which I think actually is a very useful resource for understanding the world that shaped the war and the one which we're going to have to live in after the war. And our starting point, I think, in this discussion should be to recognize that what we're living through is not just a security crisis for Europe, it's also a philosophical crisis, because we had a view of the world and a project which was built on the idea that former enemies could become friends through economic, legal, and eventually political interdependence. And the whole European project has been premised on this idea of trying to build those kinds of links. And what I think is very striking about the war in Ukraine is that though the pictures which you see do look like a throwback to earlier conflicts, immediately people thought of 1968, 1956 with Russian tanks going into independent countries around Europe. The reality of the way this war is being conducted is quite different from a lot of those earlier conflicts. It's not taking place behind an iron curtain. It's between countries that are deeply bound up with each other in ways which are unprecedented, but also bound up with us. And even as Russian tanks and airplanes and shells brutalize Ukrainian cities, we should remember that far from preventing this conflict, interdependence actually was in some ways one of the causes for the anxiety, for the uncertainty, for the tensions which have led to where we are at the moment. And it's also emerging as one of the most important battlegrounds. I recently written a book called The Age of Unpeace, where I look at a metaphor for geopolitics today, and I say that it's a bit like loveless marriage where the couple can't get divorced. And a bit like in a marriage that goes wrong, it's the things which brought the world together in the good times which are dividing it in the bad times. In a marriage, it's about who gets custody of the holiday home, the pet dog.
Can you slow down a bit, please?
Or I got to slow down a bit, sorry. It's about who gets custody of the holiday home, the pet dog, the kids. But in geopolitics, it is all of the things that were meant to be bringing us together. Economics, technology, the movement of people, culture, the internet, climate, health. These are the 7 battlegrounds that we looked at over 80 maps in our Power Atlas. And I think they show us the ways that this world is not just uniquely united and interdependent, but also how a bitter competition between different poles of power is playing out through the links that tie us together. And I think that these questions have come very much to the fore in the battle which we're having with Russia over Ukraine. All of those 7 battlegrounds have been instrumentalized in different ways. And I think as we sort of think about the idea of a geopolitical Europe, a lot of the questions that we're facing up to have to do with the way that these different battlegrounds or terrains emerge. And I just want to mention 4 questions briefly, which I hope we can cover a lot during the discussions. And the first question, I think, is whether Europeans can adapt to a regional order that's based on the balance of power rather than one based on laws and institutions. We had a vision of an order with Russia, and we're now, unfortunately, going to have to develop a European order against Russia without common institutions that work, with very little trust. And that is both going to lead to a big push towards rearmament, a new debate about military bases, probably even about nuclear weapons. But I think even more challengingly for us as Europeans is as our idea of security spans from everything from nuclear weapons to supply chains, and the US tries to reduce its exposure in Europe, the role of the European Union as a security actor is increasingly going to come to the fore, whether it's on energy, on food, on raw materials, on finance, on supply chains, on technology. Our notions of security are going to have to change. And a lot of these areas that we didn't think of as geopolitical have got a new geopolitical rationale in the European project. The second big debate, I think, is about the borders of the European Union and of NATO. For many years, we were quite relaxed about borders in Europe. Our main goal was to get rid of them. And the edges of the European Union and NATO were deliberately vague. And what we've seen in Ukraine is actually how high the stakes are about whether you're inside or outside any of these institutions. And a lot of the story, I think, over the next period is going to be about deciding that. There are debates in Sweden and Finland about NATO membership. And there's also a big debate about countries like Ukraine, Moldova, Georgia, the Western Balkans, who are currently outside of the European Union but want to get in, even though at best they're many years from being ready to do it. And I think that's going to lead to a new debate about a multi-speed Europe and what opportunities there are to engage with these countries, whether it's the single market, the energy union, the Green Deal. And at ECFR, we've been very focused on the idea of developing security compacts with a lot of these countries. The third set of questions, I think, is about the economic and societal resilience of Europe in the face of weaponized interdependence. At the moment, there's a lot of public support. We've been doing polling in lots of countries, and we've found a lot of support both for sanctions, and also it's been very moving to watch people open their hearts and their homes to the millions of people who are fleeing Ukraine. But how long is that going to last if prices go through the roof, and if you get the inevitable disruptions which large flows of people make to the politics in different countries? And I think there's a big question amongst Europeans about whether we're going to be able to socialize our responses so that you don't have clear winners and losers within the European Union, which breaks our ability to hang together on it. And for me, the fourth and biggest question which comes out of these maps is about the nature of the European order. I think for the last few years, we thought of European order almost as a sort of Galapagos order that could somehow be disconnected from evolution of global security. But one of the things that's happened, I think, partly as a result of the measures we're taking against Russia, is to drive Russia and China even closer together, and in the process, to link the European theatre with the Indo-Pacific theatre. And I think that it's quite clear that the US wants to carry on its shift towards the Indo-Pacific in the long run, and we don't have that luxury as Europeans. But we're seeing in our attempts to engage with countries like Japan and South Korea in terms of the response to what's happening here, a linkage of these two theatres. And I think that how they respond to it, relate to each other, and what kinds of relationships we develop is going to be a big question for geopolitics. I think that it's only really by re-visualizing the world and understanding how a lot of these links that tie us to other parts of the world are, in fact, overlaid with power relationships, as well as the opportunity for cooperation and for creating wealth, that we can actually become a truly geopolitical actor. And I'm very thrilled that we have the person who's going to have to do the most to make this geopolitical Europe, the midwife of a geopolitical Europe, to lead this discussion today. I think in many ways this geopolitical awakening after Ukraine is based on a sort of big contradiction between the world that we want to live in and the one which we have to live in and which Putin has forced on us. And we're going to need to have a foot in both camps, in the Kantian world of interdependence, but also we're going to need to make sure that we can survive in the jungle, which is increasingly surrounding Europe. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Your questions and points also very well noted about balance of power, borders, resilience, the future of European order. But I wanted to turn to you, of course, because I remember also you once said that there was a big contrast when Europeans discussed politics or policies with the Americans, that Europeans were always saying what they thought about things, and Americans were always saying what they were going to do about things. But it seems you've been doing quite a lot in the last month. I mean, this is the Europe that is acting and getting its act together. There's been massive number of decisions. Just give us a hint of what is next on your agenda. What is the next thing that you will want to see Europeans doing or keeping doing the next week ahead? What are the immediate challenges ahead now for you? And for Europe, of course.
Well, is there a micro?
You have a mic here. It's working.
Have a micro, okay.
Good. Let's see. Or maybe you can... Yeah, okay.
It's off.
Do I need it?
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, let's hope we are going to have a relaxed conversation. Let's hope that I am going to learn a lot from you. This is not an examination to the high rep saying, what are you going to do? Yesterday I was at the European Parliament. I was grilled by the parliamentarians, none of them being satisfied, saying that we don't do enough, from a wide range of positions, from the ones who were saying almost that we have to go into war, and others saying that we have to stop arming Ukraine in order to make the war finish immediately. Finish how? It's another question. No? And this morning I've been having a long conversation with the Foreign Affairs Minister of China to prepare the next summit. So I need to take this occasion in order to get from you insights, because what I can tell you, you already know. You already know that we were very much busy preparing the green transition and preparing the digital revolution and preparing the social cohesion of our societies after the pandemics and the recovery, and then suddenly the war. And suddenly the war. Not very far away. And this has been certainly an awake for the Europeans, because we try hard to take the war out of our imagination. And certainly we have done a lot. At the normal pace of the European Union, it has been supersonic. The normal rhythm in which we take decisions and we implement them, it has been quicker than ever, extraordinary. But I am a person which is more leaning to self-criticism than to the self-praising. So I wouldn't say that what they have done it's enough, because it's certainly not enough. I agree with the parliamentarians yesterday. And this has to become not an awake, but a normal. This should be a normal. This should be something in which we live permanently. And to understand that apart from being a soft power, we need to be a hard power. And I know that when one says hard, immediately people think on military, things on military force and things on war. Well, hard is not necessarily that. You can be hard using tools which belongs to the civil sphere. We need to have a certain power of coercion, a certain power of answering the coercions from others. And the most important task, and that is your question, is to overcome our security weakness and cancel our energy dependency and adapt our institutions to the way required in order to be really a power. Let me say some words about it. First, it has to be the normal. It cannot be an awake. You have to be permanently on this mood. Second, we have to be very much aware of our weakness from the point of view of security and defense, and increase it. Increase our capabilities on security and defense, both at the level of member states, at the level of the European Union, and inside NATO. Second, energy dependency. We should have done it since 2014, when Crimea. And since then, we have been saying that we have to decrease our energy dependency from Russia and increasing it every year. Well, now it's the moment to really take this seriously and make it work together, climate policy and security policy. Never more than now, both things go together. Our security depends critically on our energy independence. So let's work hard in order to decrease it, using all the tools that we can have, from the ordinary citizens doing something to the big design of the energy policy. But by the time being, we are in the situation that the leaders took on the last European Union Council, but this is the most important thing. And the third line of action is who we are. How do we work? What do we want to be? Our decision-making process, certainly should be reviewed. This shows once and again that we are as a strength as the less strength member. The weaker member marks the limit of our capacity. Second, what about enlargement? What about our spheres of influence in our neighborhood? When you go to the Balkans and you see how important is the Russian influence, it has a lot to do. It has a lot to do with the way the process of enlargement has been conducted. And finally, let's be prepared to face a world crisis on food and energy, and a battle of narrative about it. It's clear, I'm coming from the Doha Forum, talking with the people from the global south, and don't believe that everybody is fulfilling, everybody is sharing our views of the conflict. Yes, we have a strong majority on United Nations. Is that a solid wrong majority, or it's going to be facing challenges when people start suffering the consequences of the war, not of the sanctions, but be it the war or the sanctions, will be a battle of narrative. And certainly we should be prepared to face a world in which hunger will appear. So first we had the pest, second we have the war, and now comes the hunger. Not for us, mainly, but for a very important part of the world, very much dependent on the exports of food, especially wheat, from Russia and Ukraine. 30% of the world exports come from there. And this will create energy prices plus food crisis, a perfect storm. And this will create a situation where we will have to prove that we are really a geopolitical power, mobilizing our financial tools and our geopolitical influence. And finally, even our rules, our fiscal rules will have to be reviewed. We want to increase our military capabilities and our social cohesion and to face food crisis all over the world and subsidize the high energy prices. All that will put a question mark about how do we manage and how do we balance our fiscal policy. So this is an existential crisis for Europe. It's true that Europe is being built on the crisis. Well, this is a specific type of crisis. It touches the essence, the substance of what we are, what we want to do, which kind of world we would like to build.
Excellent. So, we have hundreds of people viewing and watching and commenting on especially all these dimensions. Let's move maybe to one of these terrains, which is hard power, because war coincided very much, of course, with the process of drafting and approving the strategic compass. And you've said, is this time different? This is also a question you said. Or is this another time in which we will say we were going to be doing things and we want? And what is new here? And what? Maybe you want Jana to chip in first, and then we let the HRP to react.
Thank you, Nacho. Maybe first...
The others can react.
Of course, they will.
Maybe first a few comments. I think you got it exactly right.
Can I have the mic so they can check your mic?
Yeah,
okay,
of course. Is that enough? Can you hear me like this? Yeah? Okay. First, I think you got it exactly right when you said we are in a new normal and it should become normal. So the geopolitical awakening should not end in a geopolitical moment, but should be more permanent. And that's what it needed, what is needed. I was very impressed by the speed of the decisions that were taken in the European Union, by the firmness and also by the broken taboos. Coming back to the strategic compass. So one of the new instruments, not in the compass, but also strengthened through the compass, is the European Peace Facility, something that was decided during the German Council presidency. And I think this is really something that we cannot cherish enough, that the European Union managed to decide to give twice 500 million euros to Ukraine, or to give it...
1,000. Now it's 1,000.
Yeah. Now it's a billion, exactly. So twice 500 million to Ukraine in order to procure weapons, lethal weapons. So this is something that I think is really a game changer for the European Union, because that is unprecedented and has never happened. When it comes to the strategic compass, Nacho, I would say that it is not a silver bullet to solve all our problems, but it's a very good and very important step in the right direction. What the compass, I think, did very right is to enable the EU to boost European defense, and not only EU defense, but through, for example, capability development, to create instruments and to enable member states to work more closely together in order to achieve capabilities that are then also useful in other frameworks, a NATO framework, for example. So I think the division of labor that somehow was established between NATO and the EU is a good one. Also, the strong emphasis in the compass on the complementarity of NATO and the European Union, I think, is the right answer in this very moment. And I think the EU is going to be the main framework for crisis management in the future, and it should become a very good framework for capability development, because now, with all the additional spending, also in my country, Germany, we need to make sure that it's not just buying off the shelf, buying American products, but that we strengthen the European defense industrial base simultaneously. And I think the compass has some strong anchoring points. And also when it comes to boosting resilience of our societies, I think the right ideas are in the compass. Now, I think it's up to the member states and the European Union institutions to basically pick up the work and develop it further, and to also develop follow-up strategies, for example, on space. But I think for me, the compass comes at the right time. I think it was very good to keep the time frame. And I think to adapt the compass also when it comes to language, when it comes to how Russia is viewed, to make it a valuable tool and instrument for these challenging times.
I thank for that. Yes, but let me launch one idea. We agree that we have to increase our military expenditure. Something difficult to say in Europe, where you don't win elections telling the people that you want to increase military expenditure. You don't win an election like this, at least until now, because people prefer butter to canyons. Good. But now the time has come to explain to the citizens that we are facing challenges and dangers, and we have to face them. Look, at the Helsinki time in '75, the military expenditure of the countries that now are the core of the European Union were 4% of their GNP. In half a century, we have decreased from 4% to 1.5%. This is the biggest demilitarization process of the history, not only on the amount of resources mobilized, but also on the political will to use it. Because one thing is to have the military capabilities, and another thing is the will to use them. And this is two different things. Good for Germany to launch this idea of 100,000 million euros to spend on military. It marks the way. But one thing is to have the capabilities, and another thing is the will to use it, which poses existential questions for countries like Germany, who has made peace in Europe its existential purpose. But this demilitarization of the Europeans in half a century, putting under the umbrella of the US and giving it for granted, has marked the last 50 years. But this increase in our capacities should not be done by increasing proportionally what we have now. And each member state multiplying by X its military expenditure, because it would be the biggest waste. The only way of increasing our capability is pooling, is coordinating, is avoiding duplications, is avoiding gaps. And this is what the European Defence Agency has been working on. And if the solution would be everybody increase what do they already have multiplied by X, it will be a big waste of money and political energy. And there comes the Europe of Defence as a coordinator, as one who tries to make this increase in a way that makes it more efficient. And then comes the compass saying how to do it. Certainly, having the capacity of mobilizing 5,000 troops, that's important, but it's anecdotic compared with the most important work, which is make our military capabilities growing up in a coordinated manner. And it's not going to be so easy, because it will touch at every one member defining the kind of army they want to have. Not everybody has to decide what kind of army they have to have. Altogether, we have to think about which are our collective capabilities and which is our security framework. And this is the important thing to do. The paper's there, and it puts the duty, but it has to be implemented.
Any reaction on this?
So how do you think we can do that? Because I agree we're going to have a wall of hundreds of billions of euros getting spent on European defence. And if we look at how well we've spent we're already the biggest spenders in the world after America collectively. And we have zero capabilities on a lot of the challenges that we faced. So I think that is the big question. But how can we make sure that we do better now?
And that we don't even go backward by buying or by undoing the armaments program that we already have.
No, but I think important work has happened here over the past years with the coordinated annual review on defense and the PESCO project, and especially the European Defense Fund. So I think the idea that there is European money to enable companies to work together better and basically to multiply the money through the initial fund is, I think, exactly right. And so I think that's what I said. I mean, of course, the compass is no silver bullet, and the acronym soup is no silver bullet either. But I think if European member states want it, and now I think there is a new urgency to this, then there is already a framework in place through which European defense companies can come together and can start coordinating and cooperating. What I think is important is, as I said, also to find the right balance. I mean, of course, now, for example, my country, Germany, has this huge amount of money to spend. And of course, there are some immediate decisions, some capabilities that Germany needs to procure fast. Like, for example, the decision to procure the F-35 is one of those that is not exactly boosting, I would say, the EU defense industrial base. But at the same time, I mean, people in Berlin thought about this and made sure that we will follow through with FCAS and procuring Eurofighters at the same time. So I think it's really about thinking what do we need to do on a European level. And I think here the idea that Europe needs to get better in having strategic enablers is very important. So that we really are aware also what do the United States now basically provide and and we couldn't do without it. So how can we grow ourselves in having these strategic enablers? So I think that should be a goal. And in the compass,
that's the question to the aeronautical engineer you are, not to the HRVP.
No, but in the compass, I mean, at least there are some ideas in there. And I think what is also really important for Europe's future is not to spend it on the technologies of the past, but to invest in the technologies of the future, to really invest in research and innovation that has been really neglected, in the past. So I think that is something.
That's why the Compass, for example, proposes to create a Center for Disruptive Technologies in the European Defence Agency that was created by the Lisbon Treaty And to tell the truth, I don't think member states has been very much aware of what this agency is doing and not paying enough importance to what this tool means in order to coordinate and to make us to be at the front line of the technological developments. Technology is everything for war. And today's war technology, it has always been everything. Yeah, the courage of the soldiers in the Middle Age maybe could count a lot. But today technology is about everything. It's the disruptors and arbiters, the spoiler. So we have to invest in disruptive technologies. We have to create an industry of defense at the level of our needs. And we have to be ready to present in NATO a complement that reinforces NATO. But I think that the debate between NATO and the European Union, it should be over. I don't want to go back again to the idea, are you alternative or complementary? Let's stop discussing about the sex of the angels. And that's what the Americans told us. The Americans told us, okay, do you want to be stronger? Do it. Do it. And when I will write my memories, I will write how this has happened, how we broke the taboo, and who did it, and who was very much in favor and who was less in favor. But this will be for my memories, not for now. The important thing is that this happened. And this happened a little bit like a landslide of the snow in the mountain. You know, the snow in the mountain is balancing, and suddenly a little bit more of wind, and boom, it goes down. Yes, suddenly we realized that we had a fund that we were using to provide arms to our partners in Africa when we train their troops. And why not to provide arms to our partners when they are invaded? Because Ukraine is our most important partner. We don't have any association agreement with anyone else in the world more comprehensive and more deep than the one that we have with Ukraine. So everybody was considered logical and natural and agreed that we could provide money to bring some arms to some partners in conflict very far away from us, low intensity conflicts compared with what is happening in Ukraine. And suddenly the idea of saying, well, and why not we don't use this money in order to arm Ukraine? Instead of every member state providing in a disordered and uncoordinated manner different elements for the war that maybe the Ukrainians didn't need, or maybe they had 2 or 3 times. And to put in our external action service a clearinghouse in order to match the Ukrainian requests, demands, and our capacity of supplies, it has been an extraordinary tool, maybe more important than the money. And yes, it has broken a taboo, but from now on, we have to build on that. We have to build on that. It cannot be an exception one moment and then going back to the old normal. And this is something that we have to make clear for the future, because the threats will not disappear. I don't know how this war is going to finish. The war will finish, but I don't know how. But the danger will not disappear. The danger for our security will not disappear. And we have to put in our minds that we need to get rid of dependencies. Because the weaponization of interdependencies, which is a nice academic sentence, now is full reality. Now is full reality. The world should be trying to decrease the amount of money that Russia is getting from their oil and gas. The world.
To
the whole world.
right now.
The whole world, not us Europeans.
So we're going to move to your other 2 favorite terrains, energy and also technology. With Susi here. I think your mic is making your phone is making interferences, so maybe you could put it there so the live stream is not affected and people can listen to you.
My phone beside the micro. My secret service.
But maybe I can bridge that gap by encouraging that member states should maybe invest even more in the European Defence Fund. Initially it was double the size and then it shrank. So maybe now it's the time also to think bigger in the future and to think about more money and better.
I remember the budgetary discussion. I remember very well the budgetary discussion. This fund was heavily cut.
Exactly.
Because nobody believed it was critically important. No? So, well, come on, what is this defense fund? Not even defense fund, peace facility, cut it. No? And defense fund for industry was also heavily cut because the mood were different, the environment were different, the perception of the challenges and risks were completely different. In 2 years, the geopolitical landscape has completely changed.
But I don't want to dominate the defense part.
No, I mean, we made promises to bring at least some proposals, so there are proposals, more money to the defense.
And better linkages between EU and NATO still when it comes to planning processes.
You take note, you're in
At that time, when we were cutting these two funds, we were already aware that the danger was there. We should be aware that really something was going to happen.
Great. So, Susi, as mentioned, one of the great risks of this war is that it will derail the energy transition that we so much wanted to engage and successfully complete. Is it a moment kind of to pause on that transition, to accelerate, to try and do both things at the same time, depending on which fronts you want to play also this war? And I also would want a comment by you on oil and energy sanctions, of course, because that's also a hot topic on which we can maybe bring some ideas to the panel. So thank you again for stepping in.
No problem. Happy to be here. Thank you for having me. So I think we have to be clear that at this point, both of the scenarios that you lay out are possible. That there is a genuine risk that our focus on the urgent need to diversify current energy sources is at a cost to progress on the climate agenda. But I also think that we can do both, and I think we should do both. I think what is absolutely critical in the energy sphere is recognising that we need to, at the same time, work on our immediate needs, but also look in a broader sense at our longer-term energy needs. And what I see as positive in the current landscape to enabling us to do both, I think one thing I'd point to is a very clear broadening of our definition of energy security. HRVP, you talked about our broadening of our definition of security in a wider sense, but I think in the field of energy, this is happening too, that we are understanding that it's not just about where we're getting energy from, it's about what energy and what role different sectors can play in that. And that's something that the climate community has been pushing for a long time. And I think that is one of the the positive benefits of the current moment is that we can see the potential there. We can see the rhetoric in Repower EU, the document which came out at the beginning of March, setting out the European strategy for this. But I think the challenge now is putting in the right investments to really put that in place. The conversations that I have, I'm sure you do too, with private sector providers in the renewable sphere tell us that this is not about a question of cost effectiveness, it's a question about what we choose to scale up most quickly. And then I think the second positive point I would highlight in the current landscape for enabling us to do both is that I feel that we're in a moment where there's a keen public awareness of the role of the energy challenge and of the interconnection between this in a security sense, a hard security sense, and then also our climate security. It seems that we're seeing lots of examples in member states of public willingness to take a hit in terms of trying to do better on energy efficiency and actually going ahead of governments in some senses on this area because there is huge empathy, as has been alluded to by others, for the situation in Ukraine, and trying to play a role here is something that we feel as individuals that we can do. But despite those two positives, I think that if we are going to do both, we have to be realistic, that it's not going to be easy, that the geopolitical environment has got much tougher, and we're going to have to take quite brave decisions about how and when we put where we put our money. And I think we have to keep the eye on the goal of independence over the longer term, and invest towards that. And I think part of that has to be about looking at the broader Fit for 55 package and working out what is and isn't going to be possible, and start thinking through now, will tools like the CBAM be realistic, particularly in relation to our neighbourhood countries with whom we're going to be quite dependent on this, given this diversification of energy, and as part of the transition. And then I think, you know, the second thing that I see as being essential is that we need to be clear that we're going to be reliant on partnerships to make this transition, this dual transition. This is a new dual transition now, away from Russian dependence and also towards cleaner energy sources. I feel sometimes that the debate in recent weeks around the energy question feels a bit as if we're sort of aspiring to self-sufficiency, energy autarky, and we need to be clear that that's not going to be the case in either scenario. We're going to need good partnerships with provider countries for both new sources of gas, but also for renewable sources. Most countries in Europe just haven't got enough sun. So in terms of building up the solar sector, we're going to have to work with neighbourhood countries. But it's also about natural resources, and the Power Atlas lays this out quite clearly, that when it comes to the minerals that we're going to need for green tech, we're not the best placed in Europe, and so we really need a strategy that underpins this. And so I'll finish on what I would see as being an essential tool for taking us through this, which is as part of your effort to sort of rethink how we take less circuitous decisions and join up the EU more, I think that we really need to be thinking about climate and energy together now. And we need an energy diplomacy strategy which underpins that and runs right through the system and looks at these questions together to build up the dialogue with the partner countries that we're going to need to work with on that.
So there's a major diplomatic rearrangement of here, right?
Well, the first thing that we have to keep in mind is the Russia aggressiveness has been built on their oil. In 1991, when the Russia-Soviet Union collapsed, they were producing 12 billion barrels a day. 12. In 98, at the bottom of the situation, their production was cut by half, 6, less than 6. Last year, they were again at 12. So look at that. The collapse of the Soviet Union meant dividing by 2 their oil production. So they became a poor country. And on the Putin's time, first, before military resources. And they have increased, multiplied by 2 their oil production, not to tell about gas. And at the same time, price increases. So the assertiveness of Russia, the capacity to create havoc, to put trouble, depends critically on their wealth. Financial capacity comes from oil. So the best thing that we could do is to cut it, to isolate Russia from the oil and gas markets. This is easy said than done, I know. But what I think we have to be aware is that on the last years, knowing that this was going to be a threat, we have not been doing that. And now I think the warning has been intense enough in order to convince us. Huh? So don't do like St. Augustine saying, may God give me chastity, but not today. Huh? Do it right now, immediately, quickly, as quick as possible. And for once, the climate change battle and the geopolitical fight goes hand in hand. The oil from Russia is very bad. It's very dense and full of sulfur. So it would be a good thing for the atmosphere if we stop burning it. Even for the OPEC, it will be good to cut down the Russian oil. And to imagine that Russia is able to bring its oil and gas to China, it's not so easy. Very far away, a lot of investment in infrastructures. So there is not an easy alternative market for Russia that us. So we have to concentrate our efforts on that and to build gasification and liquefaction stations in the whole European coast, to link the European peninsula to Europe, to look for other suppliers, to save. This is a time for being really, really tough on that, to put prices on energy and to look for the social balances, because energy poverty will be one of the consequences of that. It touches the social fabric also. When I'm saying 1 degree less means 7% less, etc., I have to understand also that many people cannot reduce any more because they are at zero level. They cannot reduce their heating because they don't have it. So it has to be also a social compensation. But if we are not able to reduce in 1 year to 50% the gas consumption from Russia, it will be really a failure from our part. We at the Commission, we believe it's possible. But it certainly will depend on the availability of gas from other countries. But you know, gas is not like this. Huh? If your field is producing at 100% capacity, you have to go to build another field. And this takes quite a long. I'm coming from Qatar, and every time I am phoning to one of my colleagues for the Foreign Affairs Council, you know where he is? Buying gas. Buying gas. Why are you, X, what are you doing there? Buying gas. Well, the first thing to do is to go and to buy gas altogether, instead of putting into competition one against the other. And that's what the European Council decided to ask the Commission. It's not so easy, because gas are not the member states. Hundreds of people buying gas in the world. But there are political decisions, partnerships, saving, developing renewables. This is a time of renewables. Do it quickly. Maybe if it's going to be a little bit more costly, we have to be ready to accept the cost. What we cannot tell people is that we are going to overcome this crisis and become more secure at zero cost. It has a cost, and it has to be paid, because otherwise the cost will be much bigger.
I completely agree with you that the ability to work together on the procurement is one element of work together. I would say that another part of what we need to do within Europe to make sanctions an option is indeed on the public level. And the polling which we've commissioned at ECFR, which Mark referred to earlier, shows quite clearly that security is an area where Europeans feel that we should be operating at European level. But the other part of the deal needs to be that there will be some kind of solidarity between member states to help citizens through the worst of those costs. Of course, it won't be without cost, but there has to be some investment in that at the political level as well. But you know, what I would say is that I think the question of whether or not we should or shouldn't put sanctions, move to oil and sanctions and possibly gas at this point is a different question from whether we should be able to. And there I fully agree that we need that to be a credible threat. And as things stand right now, I think that the sort of the differences of view around the council table are very well known. And I think that all plays into to Putin's calculation as it did before the war. So this comes back to your point about that this can't be a geopolitical moment. This has to be a longer-term realization that we need to have that ability.
Look, this is an extraordinary asymmetric shock. It is the third asymmetric shock, but it is really asymmetric from many points of view. From the point of view of the refugees who are knocking at the door of the Poland first, then to Portugal, certainly, completely asymmetric. 5 million or soon 5 million people, I'm afraid, pushing in our borders. Which borders? The eastern borders, not the western or the south borders. Completely asymmetric from the point of view of the movement of the people. Completely asymmetric from the point of view of energy dependency. In Spain and Portugal, almost zero dependency. In Hungary, 100% dependency. So we have to understand that the position of member states cannot be the same. When I'm saying, I am ready to renounce to Russian gas. I am not using it, so I'm ready to renounce to it. That's not a lot of value. If I have 100% dependency, I think twice before saying I'm ready to renounce. So it has to be a compensation system, a solidarity system, and more interlinked. We talk about the European electricity market. Well, such thing doesn't exist, at least not in Spain, because Spain is completely isolated from the electricity point of view from the rest of Europe. What kind of a European market? So we have to increase the interconnection, we have to increase the possibility of bringing energy from one country to another, and that our imports from the south can flow to the east equally, that the east are coming to the west. And certainly it's not going to be overnight, but it has to be think now and to put into action immediately, because it is the real proof of our capacity to face an asymmetric crisis, because this is the prototype of an asymmetric crisis. And then will come the financial consequences of the crisis and the geopolitical consequences of the crisis, not only on energy, but also on energy. Also on energy. But if we don't use this moment in order to explain to the people that, look, it's good to have cheap energy, but if this cheap energy comes from someone who uses the money to create troubles and obliges us to spend in defense, then it's not cheap. Then it's not cheap. The cheap energy is not the place where is it produced at the lower cost. Because if the one who produces the energy takes the money to create an army and attack you, and you have to spend to defend against it, then that's not cheap energy.
And then the external diplomacy also. There is
Yes.
Iran, Venezuela. There's a major shift in external relations
And
also.
yeah, and you see the Americans knocking at the door of Maduro. Say, hello, friend, by the way, do you have some oil? I'm joking, but it is the way it is. We need to look for alternative sources of oil by the time being, and we need to substitute oil and gas for other products, less creating of vulnerabilities and less incentive for war. Less incentive for war. You know, which is the third biggest expenditure in the world, military expenditure in the world? It's Saudi Arabia. It's Saudi Arabia. It's not any Western country.
Not once Germany spends its 100 billion.
Until Germany.
No, but that's something that people have to understand, and I think there's a good moment to making or doing pedagogy, political pedagogy. And certainly we have to mobilize our diplomatic capacity, and we are preparing in the Commission a communication about that, about how to mobilize our diplomacy in order, well, you go to a country and you tell him, I need more gas. And he says, sorry, I am 100% full. My capacity is 100% full. The only thing I can do is to divert and redirect some of the contract that I already have with someone else, if this someone else agrees. So in the short term, the capacity of rerouting is not big. If you tell them I want more in the shorter, middle term, they will tell you, well, I will increase my investments, and then I will produce more, but not tomorrow, the day after tomorrow. Then you have to ensure him that the day after tomorrow you will buy it, because if not, he's not going to do this investment. And then there is another question that has to be taken into consideration here. If we are serious with the green transition, 60% of the oil and gas reserves will have to remain on the ground. They should not be burned. So it is also a curse in order who takes the reserves out first, because the last will not be able to use it. So it's a big incentive for people to produce quicker and more. Because if we are serious on not using all the oil and gas reserves in the world, some of them will remain underground, no value. So it should be a speed for people producing quicker.
Okay. So let's move now to our third terrain, which is a terrain that's also very dear for you, which is technology. And as you've written, of course, power today is not only about tanks, but also specific technology, disinformation.
Tanks is the technology
cybersecurity.
also.
Yeah, of course, but some tanks have very little technology, as we're finding out.
Yeah.
They just armored, whatever. Yeah? So, and we're very happy to have Marietje here with us, who's been looking very much at this capacity of technology to unleash progress, but also democracy and values and everything, and especially at a time in which just 20 days before the war, China and Russia signed an without limits alliance, which includes technology, by the way, in a very important way. And at a time in which we are engaged in a number of initiatives like the TTC, the Global Gateway. How do we pull all these things together now after Ukraine, which is kind of ground zero also for people to wake up to the importance of cyber and disinfo and everything?
Right. Well, thank you. It's a bit of a shift of a topic, but I wanted to start with an anecdote. In what is only 6 weeks ago, but seems like a century ago, was the Munich Security Conference, where I'm sure a number of you were. And in the late evening of Saturday, 2 of the world's best cybersecurity experts had designed a war game. You may be familiar with a tabletop exercise where you basically game out, it's a bit of an unpleasant term in the context of war, but where you really try to seriously play out a scenario of how a war might unfold. And of course, the scenario was based on the looming threat from Russian tanks, homing in on Ukraine. But the effort of the war game was really to try to bring people around the table to a place where we are basically now in real life, which is that an escalation had happened and that the EU had imposed all possible sanctions. And so the question was, what happens next? And what happens in a scenario where Russian actors will unleash crippling cyber attacks on Western targets? And one of the things that was striking was that for the Europeans at the table, it turned out to be incredibly difficult to bring themselves to what happens next. So speakers would come back to saying, well, we would impose more sanctions. And then the answer was, well, but all the sanctions in this scenario have already been imposed. So what would you do next? And what would you do if your banks or your transport systems or your energy grid or your hospitals would be targeted in cyber attacks? And one of the takeaways I had, besides the fact that I think we should count our blessings that this scenario has not 100% unfolded quite yet, one of the takeaways that evening for me was really that people really are limited by the options that they have. And so the fact that Europe has learned to speak the language of power is one step, but it has not completely managed to project power with all the necessary tools in a world that is dramatically changing, because we've all, I think, felt that there have been painful lessons learned in the war that Russia started against Ukraine about our own energy use, about our own lack of investment in technology, about our own fragmentation in the European Union, perhaps the lack of drawing firmer lines around values that have allowed specific member states to still pull vetoes or to threaten to do so. But the lessons learned that we are now dealing with in a crisis which indeed is causing a lot of catching up could as well have been learned with a major cyber attack, could as well have been learned with an escalation vis-à-vis China, for example, could as well have been learned by a major refugee wave coming from a climate crisis, for example. And so what I think is a big challenge now is to make sure that we do not get completely absorbed by the current crisis, but that we keep our eye on some of the other ongoing looming threats, of which, of course, the digital domain is a specific one, where we should also acknowledge that the war by Russia against Ukraine did not start 6 weeks ago, but started years ago, with cyber attacks, of course, also with other invasions of Crimea and so on. And so I think it really has to alter our understanding of where the limits between war and peace might lie. For example, the significance of disinformation. Another thing I was struck by in the past weeks is the fact that there have been sanctions imposed on state propaganda from Russia. It's new. a lot of debate about it, whether this is good or bad, but clearly the harm of disinformation and state propaganda doesn't just start when a tank rolls over a border. The harm is ongoing, the harm is in our own societies, the efforts to attack the rules-based order, to engage in taking more virtual territory, to undermine democracy are also not new. Russia is a big actor there, but it's not the only one. And so I hope, in any case, that the much needed work to address the current crisis won't distract from the much needed work to address the ongoing looming crisis in the digital domain, where Europe in the regulatory field is very active, but cannot, unfortunately, project the kind of power that I think we must.
I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more. It's absolutely true. The war in Ukraine started several years ago with the brainwashing and the narrative about the Russians, from the genocide against Russia and the Nazification. And this has been increasing and increasing and lasting at least for 7 years. Mm-hmm. And this continues. This continues. Yep.
In our own societies, unfortunately.
And it has a lot to do with technology. Allies. Thanks to the technology, this is possible today. No? But having a broader approach to technology is bringing us on uncharted territory. That certainly. No? We Europeans, we have been mastering the world thanks to our capacity to master the steam. Quite easy, no? The steam and then the Industrial Revolution. And if you have a look at this book on the Brussels effect, you see that, well, we don't have an army, but we fix standards. You have the power of fixing the standards. You don't fix the standards if you are not the technological leader. You fix the standards because you are the technological leader. Mm-hmm. You are no longer the technological leader, the standard will be fixed by someone else. Certainly a future where the technological standards will be fixed by the US. Our ports and infrastructure will be bought by China, and where our social networks will be under Russian pressure. It's not a nice landscape. So we have to fight against this in order to keep our autonomy, defending our way of living. And for that, we have to invest much more on technology. I've been told that among the 50 more important technological firms, only 2 are Europeans. Mm-hmm. Well, if that is true, and the others are in US, are in China, are in Korea, are in Japan, are in Israel, it means that we have been lagging behind. And suddenly the Commission, we have been taking very much awareness of that. The battle for data, another sentence, data is the oil of tomorrow. Well, I don't know if it is oil of tomorrow. I'm sure you will not do the same thing with data than with oil, but certainly it will be of utmost importance. And now we are preparing the Digital Market Act, the Digital Service Act. Mm-hmm. And in fact, there is also a fight of models. Who will master, who will decide which model is going to be followed in the future in order to use, control, and survey data? Is that a state model, like in China? Is that a firm's model, the operators, like we can say in US? Mm. Or is a way of societal control? It's the society and the citizens who, through democratic process and institutions, can control it. Is that a lost battle? Someone says, this is a lost battle. It's already done. It will be one model or the other, but the third one, you come too late. Frankly speaking, I am not an expert of that, but I should not to be coming too late, because a lot of issues depends on that. My freedom, my capacity of understanding what's happening, my brain works thanks to the information it receives. If there is a systematic bias on the information I receive, I lost the sense of reality. And this is one of the most important threats to any society, to lose the control of the quality of information. And when the quality of information is systematically distorted by a political will using powerful technological means, then it's democracy, it's our way of living, it's the way we understand the Pacific coexistence which is in danger. So technology is today one of the most important issues for our society, for our model of society. And for that, we have to invest more and to try to win the time that we have been losing, because certainly when you see that only 2 out of 10 are Europeans, it's clear that we have been lagging behind the technological developments.
What's interesting, I think, is the link to the geopolitics, because even in the US, where indeed the market is currently very strong, initial investments and even today, a lot of the narrative around why tech companies need to be given legislative leeway, need to be invested in, need to be trusted, is that they project themselves as the best answer to China. Which I think would be quite a devastating verdict for democracy. But this is a very powerful narrative that is taking hold in both Washington and Silicon Valley. Now, of course, in China, the role of the state in shaping the market is also very strong. Here in Europe, we've been, on the one hand, trying to create a single market. I remember it was one of the first things when I was elected in 2009 that seemed to be a very attractive goal, but we're still working on it in Europe, harmonizing, creating one set of rules with increasing success. Then there's a very strong values and rule of law based entry point to this discussion in Europe, which I think is also very valid. But what is almost entirely missing, and sometimes even explicitly missing, is the geopolitical angle. Let me give you one example. In one of the prominent packages that is being negotiated now, the AI Act, there's an explicit reference not to talk about AI in military context, which you have to ask yourself when China and the US are pretty much driven by AI in military context to innovate, to project power, to gain strength and also public support for investments and so on. How come Europe is afraid? I think to some extent it is the reality of the fragmentation, where national security is a national competence and it causes increasing friction with a single market. If you have 27 different assessments of risk from China, how to navigate supply chains, for example, what to invest in, it's almost an overlay of the military discussion that we're having today, the similar kinds of challenges that we face. So hopefully if you're pushing for redesign of decision-making, maybe a taboo at the end to vetoes, the digital component and national security, particularly in the digital context, and how it relates to the market and how essentially you cannot create a single market without appreciating how many security aspects there are to the use of technology, then I think it would be a missed opportunity.
And there comes the role of China. The most important thing that, and I understand why the US are turning their eyes and putting the front line in the Indo-Pacific is not in the Central Europe, no? Mm-hmm. Because the big technological rift with China will decide the future. And don't forget about Africa, because which model will the African societies follow? Because if you have a look at which are the exports of China to Africa, one of the most important exports is surveillance products, surveillance cameras, and surveillance software. Mm-hmm. So which kind of model will follow the African societies? Until now we were sure that they are going to follow our model, democratic elections, competition between parties, and this will boost economic development, and everybody will be happy. But the result today is not exactly that. We talk very much about Ukraine, but we forgot about the Sahel, where the Russians are also coming, in the Central African Republic, in Mali, and we are withdrawing. So there is also a strategic shrinking of the European capacity to act worldwide.
We're running out of time, but we can still come with
And we weren't supposed to ask questions, but I need to do it nevertheless, because I have been I mean, I have been very generous, I think, with this strategic compass, but there is one aspect that struck me, and that was precisely China. Because I think what the compass did was catching up with kind of the Russian reality in terms of language and threat perception. But on China, the compass is very much still on partner, competitor, rival, but in an equal balance. So do you think that the EU and the member states, the discussions you observe, that the member states have taken lessons from the Russia experience now when it comes to their China policy, or what they expect from the European Union? Do you think that it has sunken in that we might have a China problem in the future? Because in the compass, I would say it's not really clearly reflected.
Well, there was not room for all the problems in the world. But certainly we are very, very far away of considering China a threat at the same level than Russia. Thanks God, very, very far away. You know? And, you know, one of the issues of the foreign policy of the European Union is that each member state uses the foreign policy as a leverage for their foreign policy. And it's quite natural and logical. And it means that the countries who has a strong let's say, feeling of danger, of being threatened by someone, puts more pressure on the design of the foreign and security policy in order to stress the importance of this fact. And then Russia is certainly a big challenge for the countries nearby. Russia, you can find other examples of member states very much worried about what is doing a third state. Well, I don't want to name anyone, but I'm sure you have this in mind. And China as a military danger or threat for the European Union is not in our mindset, certainly not. And until now, China has not been on the same aggressive mode than Russia is.
But not as a military threat, but as a security threat, very much so, no?
Certainly, it depends on the meaning that you give to the word security. No? But by the time being, one thing for me is clear. On the geopolitical landscape that we are building, or it's being built, it's not in our interest to lean Russia toward China in order to create a great alliance of the China plus other like-minded countries, and to create a bloc of the countries that don't have a democratic system. I don't think it's in our interest. And for China, in the short term, one can believe that what's happening in Europe is good for them, because at the end, it's a second front. No? A second front has been opened in Europe, how it diverts our energies, and especially the energy of the US, which are being called to Europe again, and forgetting for a while Indo-Pacific. But in the medium term, I don't think what's happening, the role of Russia is going to help China a lot. No, I don't think China is very happy with what's happening.
Okay, so I mean, we're coming to an end. We're almost running out of time. There are still hundreds of people with us, virtually following us on the live stream channels.
God, hundreds of people.
Yeah, this was not off the records. Sorry. Maybe one conclusion we may draw from this discussion, Marietje, is that we also need a very much more active diplomatic engagement on tech outside. I mean, outside Europe, not only inside, right? There are countries which are strategic opportunities, countries which are swinging, countries which we need to look at. Latin America, which is so dear to you, is a region, which is very much aligned on values along European lines, and there are many.
Latin America has been, in the UNGA, has been one exception, has been the part of the world has been supporting our position most.
But they cannot rely on our technology because they don't have the money, so they go for the Chinese technology. They're full of Russian disinformation, and so there is a role for diplomacy there, right, to try and work with countries who choose these things because they are the second option, not because, or the only option, not because they are there.
This is another lesson. We have to be more present in the world. Where for us, globalization was a kind of westernization. And we still believe in that, and we are completely wrong. We are completely wrong if we believe that the world is still being driven by us. From the intellectual point of view, we have to be much more present and fight for the influence, because it's not given for granted. And we still have the old influence of our imperial past, and we believe that they will follow us because we are right. To be right is good, but you need the others to accept that you are right. And then when you go to the Doha Forum and you talk with people, and then people talk about the global South, and there is a reflex of anti-colonialism and what happened in the Balkans and to ways to measures, and it requires us to abandon a certain attitude of a commodity, Here we are right, and people have to understand that we are right and follow us. Nothing is automatic. You have to win it. And you have not only to convince, but to bargain and to influence and to give support, and sometimes to give less support, more for more, less for less.
Good, so we're done. And thanks for your time and for everybody who stayed with us all along.
You were supposed to give me advice, but...
We still, Mark, he has 4 concrete things to offer to you, but he's going to lay them out just by name so we can be engaged for the next conversation. Just for things in less than, 8 seconds?
8 seconds.
The names. We want the names of those things.
Well, I think, firstly, security compacts for countries around us so that we can turn them into independent states that can stand up for their own interests. Secondly, we need to have a way of spending the money in a pooled way so that we can fill gaps and build capabilities. Thirdly, we need to have an energy diplomacy strategy as Europeans rather than competing against each other. We need to find ways of buying it together. And finally, I think we need some sort of European solidarity fund to deal with the asymmetry of the shocks that we're facing. But we've got lots of other ideas, but we will be working on all of these things at ECFR and look forward to many more conversations.
And this text should be read for everybody, because there's a lot of
the Power Atlas available not just as a hard copy, but it's free online, 80 beautiful maps, which will change the way that you look at the world.
Thank you.
So thank you so much. This is a man who does summits during the weeks and mountains during the weekends.
No weekends. Lastly, no weekends.
Thank you for being here today. It was great. Thank you. Thank you to everyone.